about learning weaving and spinning from books and building her own frame loom and inkle loom. Once her local guild began, she had more resources. She started with a rigid heddle loom and was fascinated with the use of pickup sticks to create textures. She decided to explore this more with specialized studies for the Handweavers Guild Certificate of Excellence. The COE opened opportunities for publishing the book the study as a book and designing projects for Handwoven Magazine. She likes the freedom of designing textile weaves on the rigid heddle and translating them into her 16 harness AVL Dobby loom. How's that for a contrast? Hey, Betty.
Hi there.
How are you?
I'm happy to be here with you.
We are excited to have you here today. Well, we're going to start off with a really tough question, which is, what is your favorite tea?
Well, I'm a coffee drinker.
There you go.
But I do, in the afternoons, sometimes I do like some herbal tea. I like Myers lemon and wild berry zinger.
Oh, really? I like those. Well, how did you get started in weaving? I talked some about the opening bio about how you kind of taught yourself, but how'd you get started? What attracted you to weaving?
Well, I think it went way back to when I first started learning to sew for myself.
Oh, okay.
And fabric fascinated me, and I'd love to cruise through the fabric stores looking for interesting fabric. In the moment that I connected that the fabric was hand woven, or could be, was when I found a bolt of fabric from Guatemala, and it said hand woven. I thought, wow.
You found that in a fiber store?
Fabric store.
Did you really?
Uh-huh.
Wow.
So that stuck in my mind for all these years. And I worked at Jansen in Portland, who makes swimsuits. So I was surrounded by the production process, had access to extra knitted fabrics. But I was still interested in weaving, but I didn't have time. And weekends I was climbing mountains. We have a Cascade Range that extends from Washington down to Southern California, Oregon, and they're tall volcanoes with glaciers, and I got hooked on that. So there was no time to go learn to weave. I met my husband on one of those trips. So after we were married and we moved to Southeast Washington, I wasn't working, and so I had time and money to pursue weaving. And I couldn't find anybody else that was interested in this kind of thing, but our local art center offered a course in natural dyeing. And women showed up from all over the area, and there was so much excitement in that room that I said, we have to keep meeting. And that was the beginning of Desert Fiber Arts. And we chose that name because in the Tri-Cities is on the east side of the mountains, where semi-arid desert. Most people think Washington's all forest, but only about half of it. So that was the beginning of Desert Fiber Arts 50 years ago. So they're celebrating 50 years. So I want to thank my friends Sharon and Laverne for instigating this interview and Desert Fiber Arts for supporting it. So anyway, we didn't have anybody local to get supplies or for teaching. And a friend went to San Francisco Convergence and found the Becca rigid heddle looms. And they recommended a teacher that lived in Minneapolis, St. Paul. And we invited her to come out and teach us. And she was a Swiss-born person who married an American serviceman. And they were living in Minnesota Minneapolis, St. Paul. Some of her students, she was, I'm getting tongue-tied here. She imported looms from Germany, rigid heddle looms from Germany, from Kircher, and so she could teach weaving because that was what she had grown up with. Well, a couple of her students decided they could build a better loom, and that was the beginning of Becca Looms.
Oh.
So, and then I think the rigid heddle loom had been used all over Europe for weaving narrow bands as set up like a backstrap. But I believe that after World War II, that Kircher developed the frame loom with a rigid heddle set in and rotating beams so that the women in Germany could earn a little living. This was after the war, and Germany was pretty well devastated. So that was the beginning of the frame loom, rigid heddle, and it was thanks to Suzanne Gaston.
Did we lose her?
Yes, Kathy, we have lost her.
Uh-oh. Maybe when she comes back, we can just have her turn the camera off for a little bit and just do
Yeah,
the
I think
phone
she has a poor
sound.
internet connection. So
Yeah. Well, while we're waiting, oh, I think she might be coming right back. Thank you all for being so patient. Internet's great until it doesn't work, right? So we're running into that today. During the rehearsal, it was great. So you just never know what you're going to get.
Okay, so where were we?
Okay. Hey, Betty, let's do something for a few minutes. Why don't you, can you turn your camera off?
Okay.
Turn your camera off and let's see what happens, okay? Don't disconnect. We'll see if we can get your internet to calm down. And you keep talking. Keep telling us about your history. Because when you left, you had the Becca looms had been produced for your students said they could do a better job in the Becca looms. And you were telling us how in Germany they were making the rigid heddle looms. You still
Well,
there?
people
Okay.
think that you can only do plain weave on a rigid heddle, but that turned out to not be true. Oh, there's one.
Yeah.
As you
Is
can
that a
see,
Becca?
I can't. No, it is not.
Oh, okay.
But you can see on the rigid heddle that there's slats with a hole in it
Mm-hmm.
and a space in between. So it's whole slot, whole slot, whole slot. So the work threads that go through the slots are not controlled by where the position of the heddle. So it's those free slots that we can change the position of to
Mm-hmm.
make warp floats or weft floats. And that's the magic of the rigid heddle loom. As you know, on a harness loom, every thread is controlled by a harness. So you can't just spontaneously make warp floats and weft floats. I was also taking a harness loom class at the same time. And it was 20/2 cotton at 20 ends per inch for summer and winter.
Uh-huh.
And I was not impressed.
Because
Well, you were just locked into 2 blocks.
oh, okay.
So some of my weaver friends said, "Well, when are you going to get a real loom?" They didn't consider rigid heddle as a real loom. So that's why I decided to do this certificate of excellence with Handweavers Guild of America. And that I did the specialized study on using the rigid heddle, exploring what can be done with the pickup stick and the combinations of weft floats and warp floats. And so when I did receive the Certificate of Excellence, which amazed me because I didn't think they would think it was a real loom. So the study resulted in being published by a couple of weavers in Minneapolis as a book, but it went out of print quite quickly.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm curious because you've done with rigid heddle for a while now, and so
50 years.
what kind of changes have you seen since you first began doing rigid heddle compared to now?
Oh, more people are using the rigid heddle.
Mm-hmm.
The techniques are the same, and there's 3 more manufacturers of rigid heddles now, not just Becca. So it was after the Certificate of Excellence that Handwoven was beginning, just starting their publication, and asked me to submit some projects. So I worked with them for about 15 years, designing projects for rigid heddle, and each one I thought of as a lesson on using the pickup stick and making the patterns. In about 1987, Interweave asked me to write a basic weaver's book called Hands-on Rigid Heddle.
Yeah,
I
think we have a picture.
Yeah, you do.
Okay, let me back up for a second though, because I don't want to skip over the COE part because I think that's pretty amazing. Because I think doing a COE is tough, period. But you did almost all of it on a rigid heddle loom, right?
As much as I could.
Yeah.
I mean,
because we also have an image right here. This is one of the pieces that you did, right?
Yes. And it was a result of the samples that I wove. When I put similar weaving structures side by side, they progressed in larger and larger. And that's when I thought, hey, I probably wouldn't have come up with this if I hadn't done these samples.
Right.
And it's 2 pieces, so it's joined in the center, which is invisible.
Wow. Pretty amazing. But why didn't you take people's advice and go, okay, I'm going to do the COE. I'm going to do everything on a 4-harness loom? Because you had one, didn't you?
Oh, yeah.
So why did you stick with rigid heddle? It's almost like you said, I want to do it the hardest way I can.
No. It's because I was fascinated with this technique.
Oh, okay.
And it was just, I'm still fascinated. And I just wanted to explore what more could be done. Suzanne had taught us about 3 weave structures using the rigid the pickup stick. And I think she worked with the Kircher looms, and I think it was Ursula Kircher who came up with this method of using the pickup stick behind the heddle. So it was just used like a separate harness. And I thought there must be more to this. And that's why I did this study.
Okay. Well, you've written 2 books, and I think we have an image of one of them right here. This was the first one that you did. And at the time, and even now, I mean, this is the go-to book for a lot of people for rigid heddle. So would you talk about how and why you wrote this book?
Oh, because Interweave asked me to. Simple.
Come on, Betty,
Actually,
tell me more than that. You could have said no.
actually, the first book it's the brown one.
Uh-huh.
That was produced or published after my study.
Yeah, we've got that picture too.
Yeah.
If you want to go on to the next one, because this was your COE work, right? And then you turned it into a book.
Uh-huh.
All
and
right.
So the brown one, or the new one, is on the right, and it's completely revised because we had new technology. I could do it myself from home. And
what was some of the technology that you got after you started the book on the left?
Yeah, that was with photo plates and typesetting, and I don't know.
Oh, you mean the technology of the book? Oh, I thought you meant technology of the loom or something.
Oh no, technology of printing.
Oh, okay.
And now it's so much easier to do it all yourself because of the uh, Microsoft Publisher and Photoshop and um, the internet or the Windows. It's all you need.
So after you did the COE, did you start teaching with the book that you did for the COE and then you turned it into a book? I mean, why did you decide to make it into a book? Were there people saying, we need a book? You need to make us a book?
Well, I started teaching basic weaving, and this textures and patterns for the first book
Uh-huh.
didn't have the beginning weaving or how to set up a loom or anything. It
Oh,
was
okay.
just my study.
That's the brown book?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then I hadn't thought about writing a basic book until Interweave asked me to do that.
Huh. Yay for interweave.
Oh, that's not this book, it's the previous picture.
Okay. So
Hands-on.
how is that one different than the ones that these two right here?
Well, hands-on weaving is basic, a basic weaving book on a rigid heddle. And I wanted to
Uh-huh.
include everything that could be known about weaving plain weave, because I found that the regular weaving books for harness loom weaving didn't include things like finger pickup weaves and all the variations of plain weave. And that I wanted this just to be a total book on everything you do on plain weave. And it does, I think I included one or two patterns with the pickup stick, but it doesn't focus on that. And then when I did the revision in 2008, which is had to redo all the photographs and layout and everything, that's everything I knew about pickup stick weaves.
So it seems like that this book kind of, after you had the brown book out for a while, it sounds like this book came out of the idea of you need to start at the beginning and take everybody through the whole process, right?
Yeah.
And then you added, did you do pickup for your COE or did you add pickup for the rigid
Oh
heddle?
no, that this COE was all about the pickup weaves.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
And that revolutionizes rigid heddle, doesn't it? I mean, it really
sure
does
did.
go from plain weave to anything you want, right?
Thanks to Suzanne Gaston Boot, who brought it from Germany.
Yeah.
Because other than that, the rigid heddle wasn't really a really strong rigid heddle wasn't being produced. They're more like toys. And so that's when Becca came up with their revised loom, that was a more workable situation.
Well, we're going to talk more about pickup later because I want you to explain it and talk more about it. But I want to talk a little bit more about you. Um, because one thing I was curious about is if you could go back, I know people get tired of me asking this question, but I just think it's fascinating. If you could go back in time and talk to the woman from 1987, and you told her that your book is going to be the go-to book for rigid heddle, what do you think your reaction would have been? Did you have any idea at the time it was going to be so?
No, that wasn't even on the radar. I just wanted to get it down in print and be done with it.
Were you surprised? I mean, pleased or?
Well, I've been pleasantly pleased, yes. And I think being asked to work with Handwoven also was amazing. And that was because of receiving the certificate of excellence. It was
Mhm.
just time, it was timely that I got that just as Linda Ligon was starting Handwoven Magazine. So everything sort of flowed.
So it sounds like by doing the COE, you kind of opened up the door because you said it was just a lot of study about the different things you could do with the rigid heddle, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Before that, people weren't really, other than people that had classes in Minneapolis with Suzanne, I don't think there were many weavers around the country that were using a rigid heddle loom.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What advice would you have given yourself back then?
I didn't even think about it.
But if you did now, if you went back to that person back then, what would you say? Would you do anything different?
No,
Oh, okay.
but I got interested in weaving clothing on a 20-inch loom.
Ah,
And I reasoned when I started sewing, fabric was 36 inches wide.
yeah.
Fold it in half and lay your pattern out. So that was 18 inches. Well, a piece woven on a 20-inch loom ends up about 18 inches after drawing and everything. So that just seemed reasonable to me to start uh, making garments. And I worked out different ways of weaving strips to fill, depends on your size, how wide you need the fabric, but you don't need a wide loom to weave clothing. You can weave small strips and put them together.
Was that kind of hit and miss at the beginning?
Not really, because I had
Well, you
been,
had so much sewing experience.
yeah, and I had pattern drafting and
Oh.
all that. So it was just a natural thing.
Mm.
I wasn't afraid to cut into the fabric at all.
Yeah, if I think about me trying to do that, it would kind of be like a pup tent or something, but I don't think it'd be a real clothing. Well, you mentioned earlier, and when I was reading all the things that you had done, I kept kind of chuckling to myself because I thought, I wonder if you had a nickel for every time someone said to you, why don't you weave on a real loom? Or when are you going to get a real loom? And it's not like you didn't have a multi-harness. And like I just said in your bio, you have a 16 harness AVL, right?
Yeah,
So it's not you don't have one or you don't want one, you've got one, but
it's nice.
how do you decide
I
which one to use?
oh, well, depends on what I'm weaving.
Okay.
You know, if I want a wider piece like a blanket, I'll do it on the AVL.
Uh-huh.
And right now I've got a linen warp on that was space dyed,
Ooh.
but I'm designed it thinking about rigid heddle with float weaves, a float pattern in the warp stripes. But I
Mhm.
put it on the AVL because it's wider and it's faster to weave. But I wrote the draft based on the rigid heddle loom. I found that it was an easy transition after working with the rigid heddle loom to understand how to write a draft and the tie up and all that. And I like to get my fingers in the loom in the yarn anyway.
That is true with the rigid heddle, and when you're doing pickup, it really is much more tactile than
Yeah,
a floor loom.
yeah.
Did you ever attempt something on a rigid heddle? Go, good idea, never doing that one again.
Uh-huh. Like a 4 harness twill.
Oh,
I mean, if you're going to do that, you might as well get a loom that's designed to do that. I mean, you could do it, but why bother? So there've been several of those things. But
well, people are asked, and let me interrupt first. People are asking why we can't see you. And for those of you who joined late, we're having some technical difficulties, and we have found that if we turn her camera off, we keep her. Otherwise, we're afraid we're going to lose her. So we do have images of her work, and later on, I'm going to bring you back because people are asking about your shirt. So just
Oh.
FYI for people who are asking about that, she really is here. We just have her camera turned off for right now. All right, so we're going to show some images of your loom. We've got a couple images of the loom, and we're kind of doing this backwards, and I apologize. So explain what pickup is. This should be this is a good example of what pickup is, right?
Okay. Can you see my cursor? You can.
No.
Okay. On the left is the back of the loom. Shows the back of the loom, and there's a pickup stick that's holding up the slot threads from the lower layer. And
Okay.
those are going to float as warp floats. So that's one position, and the other position is with the heddle down and the pickup stick turned on edge, holds down some of the slot threads, and that'll make weft floats. So it's just a combination of those two things that make all the different patterns. And the stick can stay in there and slide back to the back of the loom until you want to change. And all you have to do is either insert another stick or pull that one out and repick your pattern. And it's usually, the basic one is with the slot threads is to pick up, one down, one up, one down. And that will make a 3-thread float, both warp and weft. The backside shows the opposite. If there's a weft float on the front, it's a warp float on the back. Do you follow?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Well, and this is going to show you my ignorance because I didn't become really aware of a rigid heddle loom until I've been weaving for a while. So when you started doing all the pickup, did you have to come up with a way to designate on your pattern what's pickup, what isn't? That kind of
No,
thing? How do you
I just look at it.
Okay. But if you're writing the pattern, do you have a certain way to designate it?
Oh, yeah, the instructions would be heddle up, heddle down, stick forward on edge, or sticks slide up behind the heddle.
Okay.
So that would be like 1, 2, 3. There isn't a designation like in the harness loom weaving, but the verbal directions.
So because now there's double harnesses, right? For rigid heddle. How has that changed things for you?
Well, Suzanne Gaston Voot developed the threading for 2 heddles to do double weave. And it was just sort of scratching on extra paper. And so I worked with that to refine the drawing on how to thread the loom, or thread the 2 heddles, and found out not only could you do double weave, but could also do summer and winter very easily. And you can use the pickup stick to do whatever kind of design you want. I would draw something out on graph paper with each square representing a float, which would be a threading unit, and then follow that. And it was super easy.
Now we're going to try something here. Liz, can we turn our guest, Liz doesn't do it. Can you turn your camera back on? Let's see what happens.
Okay.
Yay, there you are. All right, we may have a little pause or a delay in the sound, but I want to ask you a question and then I want you to talk about your sweater. Are you more of a color person or a pattern person?
I knew you'd ask that. Actually, color comes first. And then technique. I'm really a technique person. and I like to study the techniques from other cultures,
Okay.
weaving techniques. And that's, why the 16 harness Dobby loom's fun. So this is rayon fabric, and I tried getting closer to the camera, but it wouldn't focus close enough for you to see the weave. But I have weft floats in the stripes, and then this darker one is warp floats.
Now,
And
Liz, show the image we have, because I don't know if it's the same thing or not.
oh, I didn't send this one.
No, this is different.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, tell us about this sweater.
Well, that's one of my favorites.
It's beautiful.
And that goes into my discussion on Peru. And I got fascinated with the brown cotton, and I've collected all these different shades of brown cotton. And this was with two heddles at 20 ends per inch with the natural brown cotton. And the inlays are hand spun of the different colors that are available. And there's a seam down the front that I needle wove the selvages together, so it's almost invisible. But
So you
it is,
spun, you're a spinner also.
yeah, that's
You're
another
a woman of
story.
many talents. So tell us about Peru. How did you end up going to Peru?
Well,
Or
since
did you go to Peru, or did you just love their work?
both.
Oh, okay.
Well, since I was climbing mountains here in the Cascades and I met my husband on one of the climbing trips, we went on a trek in Peru out of Cusco to trek through the mountains. Well, I knew that weaving was primary in Peru and had asked to have extra time to investigate. So that's when I met Nilda Kalyanapa, who
Oh,
has,
really?
you know her, okay?
Everybody knows her. Yeah.
Well, she was a little high school student when I met her.
No, really?
And so anyway, our guides had mentioned that they had designed a trek through the valleys where the villages are,
Mm-hmm.
and that the people still wove the clothing that it did in the Inca times. And I thought, what a wonderful trip through the mountains and weaving. But I couldn't find anybody who was willing to lead that, so I decided I had to lead it. And so that I was able to do that for about 10 years.
Really?
And
So you
it was
led
just,
tours?
uh-huh,
Oh, okay.
yeah. And we learned to weave like 5-year-old girls learn to weave on little narrow bands. And did have Nilda as a guide after a couple of years after she graduated from college. So that was even better because she would make us sit down and weave or spin. And it was an amazing experience.
And that influenced your work then after that?
Yeah, I've always been interested in the ethnic weavings from other countries. And
Mhm.
so it really has inspired me. Like the brown cotton piece, the little inlays are a technique used in Guatemala. And so it's just, I've really been inspired by the travels I've done. And I like the weaving in Peru is so complex. They do backstrap and pick up the pattern with their fingers. And it's so complex that no foot loom alive can do it other than a jacquard.
Oh, right.
But they're simple looms, and their lifestyle all fit together because they can weave outside, they roll it up and take it with them. And
It's on
still they're
backstrap.
weaving such complex weave structures.
Mm-hmm.
It's amazing. Makes you humble. Have an expensive loom like a AVL and not be able to do some of the weaves that the Peruvians do.
Did they
So
know, did they know that you were well known for weaving in the US and that you had a book and you taught?
no,
I bet they would have been surprised. It's like
they
they don't know it,
probably,
but you're famous.
I don't think they had any concept of anything other than their culture, unless they lived in the city in Cusco. Like Nilda has been a marvelous being able to cross cultures.
Hmm.
And actually, my friendship with her went to handwoven. I mean, I was reluctant to utilize her technology, her knowledge. I didn't want to take advantage of her. But when she became acquainted with Linda Ligon, and she really was able to produce a couple books on her weaving and culture. And that's been a marvelous thing, but I knew her first.
I was going to say, I was just thinking that we need to thank you for making that connection so those books are available.
Mhm. From Italy Press.
Yeah,
She's got about 3 books, I think.
yeah.
Yeah.
So it sounds like you were an influence on some people's lives, and I've heard you talk some about people who've influenced you, but who are some of the other people that that you would say influenced you?
Well, Suzanne Gaston Voot, um, in the rigid heddle circles, and just the travels with Nilda has been just really enlightening to be able to understand the Incan culture.
Mhm.
Um, oh, some of the local weavers I've taken classes from. I've taken workshops wherever I could. So I've had a variety of workshops and different techniques. So
Now, you've taught along the way? Are you still teaching?
no, um, we moved to the Western Washington in 2000, and weaving sort of had died down in the 90s, and
Uh-huh.
quilting sort of sprung up. Everybody was quilting. So I packed up my teaching stuff and I moved. And so no, but I did start teaching right away after I got the certificate of excellence. And that really helps when students ask you a question, you have to come up with an answer. So that really helped progress in my knowledge.
How do you spell Nalda's last name?
Nilda
Hmm.
Kayanapa, Callaup, Kayanapa, AUP. I have to write it.
People are asking. Here it is. Calanaupa.
Okay.
There we go.
And Alvarez is the last name.
Alvarez.
They use both parents' last names.
There we go. I
And
apologize while I'm doing this. I want to make sure.
after my last trip to Peru, she was just developing um, study group with various villagers,
Hmm.
and it's called the CTTC. um, Textiles of Cusco. Traditional traditional textiles of Cusco. And they have a shop in Cusco, and she has about 10 villages that she works with, and they all have weaving group, and they teach the young girls weaving. And she's improved their, encouraged better quality weaving and natural dyeing. And these items are sold in her shop in Peru. And also she has sometimes an auction online. So you can email, I think it's cttc.org, something like that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, she's done marvelous since she got out of high school.
Well, do you think the many connections that we now have with Peru and other South American weavers has also helped promote rigid heddle?
No, I think the knitter's loom is from Ashford.
Oh,
Is what brought the rigid heddle back. It's all of a sudden knitters. I can have a loom.
all that knitting yarn I can weave with?
Yeah, I really think that that's what brought rigid heddle weaving back, because the knitters had their own loom, which was no different than any other loom except the name.
Well, what's next for you? What are you up to these days? What are you going to do next? New book?
Oh no,
Not
that's
only
too
no,
much.
but heck
That's
no.
too much work. No, I'm trying to weave up my stash. I've got lots of yarn that I've collected over the years, and I used shortly after our guild started, I started a small shop in my home, so I was buying a lot of yarn for resale, and so I still have
Oh,
some.
really?
Well, we needed supplies, and there
Is there
was no
anything
wheat
you haven't done? You've done a lot.
in fiber.
Well, I mean, especially in the timing of it, because you went to Peru when, I mean, everybody goes to Peru now, but back you went to Peru when it wasn't everybody going. You know, you've met these people, you wrote a book, you promoted the rigid heddle loom. You've been a busy woman.
Yeah, and I never had a job. When I'm asked, well, what's your profession? I say entrepreneur.
You are an entrepreneur, very much.
Yeah,
Well, we've got lots of questions. Shall we answer some of them?
sure.
All right. It said that is the 5-inch Becca loom. It weaves swatches. So that must be the loom that we showed way back at the beginning. Thank you, Cass, for clarifying that. Sarah Salson. Hi, Sarah. She said, I asked for a loom when I was 8 years old. My parents bought me a small German-made rigid heddle loom. It must have been the brand that you were talking about, Betty. She thinks that must be it. I kept
Yeah.
using that loom into adulthood. The first weaving class I took was with Betty at Convergence in Texas. Nice to see you again, Betty. You've paid it forward because Sarah's an amazing teacher.
Mm,
Tracy Johnson, I have the book Hands-on Rigid Heddle Weaving open right now. It's my go-to book. And that is so true. It really is a go-to book. It's almost like you got the basics and they've just stayed true all these years, right? They really haven't changed that
right.
much.
But the author doesn't always get that kind of feedback.
Well, you're getting
Especially,
it today. Oh, this is a good question. Good, Fazia. If you could design your own rigid heddle loom, would there be any changes or would you do anything different to it?
well, the Becca didn't have a ratchet system
Oh,
in
okay.
tightening the warp beams, and you could strip the threads, which I've done. And so that was a great improvement when they started attaching ratchets on the beams. Other than that, I still use my original Becca.
Well, that's what, so this is from Debbie Ellis. I have loved my Becca. It has also served me well as a first tapestry loom. Oh, there you
Mhm.
go. But it seems somewhat downplayed these days in favor of other brands, which I also have, which she also has. How might you compare Becca these days to more modern brands?
Well, I think they're all pretty equivalent. Um, the thing I liked about Becca was it was easy to disassemble, roll up the weaving, and put it in your suitcase,
Oh,
which
okay.
I've done.
Uh-huh.
But the other looms have an extra, not a beam, but a bar across the front and the back, which the warp goes around before it goes onto the beam,
Oh,
which
okay.
holds the warp level, but you can't just take the loom apart and put it in your suitcase. I mean, that doesn't matter to some people, but that's one of the advantages of the simpler loom
Yeah.
that Becca
Yeah.
has. Yeah. I
Now, is the
think they're
Becca
all,
still being made?
yes, but
Okay.
they're not publishing, not advertising very much. They're making other products. But I checked their website and they've got a whole flock of different sizes and
So there you
they're
go,
still
folks.
there.
All kinds of thumbs up on that one. Are you still doing dyeing? Natural dyeing?
Just when I need something
Like a particular color, you say, oh, I can go
like
make that.
I need a black color, so I'll take another beige or something and over dye it. I just I dye when I need something. I don't
Okay.
dye just for the fun of it. And I went through natural dyeing. That was one of the things I did before our guild met. Um, so we were going out rock climbing. I'd pick out lichens off the rocks in different
Oh,
places because I'd read that you didn't need a um, um, this. Now I can't think of the word.
I hate it when I do that. It's
Yeah,
like, I know it's there. I know it's there.
so that would, that consumed a lot of time. I collected a lot of different lichens, but never enough to really do any volume of dyeing.
Just a
But
playing around.
yeah,
I
and
didn't realize you can get different colors. I thought they all were like green.
oh no, yellow,
Oh,
yellow bronze. There's one that's you can get um, purple, but it's
really?
not very plentiful. So
Oh,
you don't want to collect very much of it.
oh.
But then I took a class where in uh, Procyon where we measured um, with a metric measure tubes to blend colors. And that was one of the best color studies is mixing the colors and seeing what happens. And of course, there's a notebook, and I still refer to it. So yeah,
So
I've taken a lot of classes.
somebody just shot up the word mordant. Is that the word you were?
Mordant, yes,
Thank you,
yes.
Diane. So we got somebody else who is saying your book has been my go-to book for learning rigid heddle weaving. Doubly so because you were using the Becca, which was my first rigid heddle loom.
Ah,
Really helped me understand my own loom. See, there's all kinds of people coming up to say you were the driving force.
well, that's great.
This is from Karen LeBlanc. I would love to hear more about your approach to weaving cloth for weaving. I'm assuming she means sewing, and then creating woven garments. What clothing patterns do you use or create, and how do you finish your items like the top you're wearing? Do you create your patterns? Because you said you've studied that, right? You know how.
Yes.
Or do you ever just buy patterns and adjust them?
No, because I gave up doing that. I have a pattern drafting program where you can customize your patterns to your measurements. And I was getting so frustrated with commercial patterns because I had to make so many adjustments for my body.
Oh,
That it was just so that was one of the great things, was the customized pattern drafting program. And
mhm.
all of a sudden things started fitting. But I just actually, it's the ethnic garments that have inspired me for weaving, making garments from weaving, because they're simple. This is just a straight piece of fabric with a hole cut out and sleeves added. I mean, you don't really need a pattern, you just need your body measurements. So that's how
What
that
is,
works.
how'd you do the trim? What is that?
It's a knitted.
Oh, okay. All right.
Oh, and the other thing, I quite often I use the smaller, well, not smaller, but I use the rigid heddle for weaving bands, narrow bands for finishing, binding.
Mhm.
Um, and actually, I'll put that on my AVL. And you can just weave away fast, especially if you're doing the yards. Yeah, I
Absolutely.
use my AVL for a number of things.
Diane McKenna again said the newer Becca's and other current rigid heddle looms have a better beam system now. So there's a plug another for more of the rigid heddle. Heidi wants to know, what is your favorite go-to structure weaving for cloth when you're making cloth to sew?
Oh, plain weave with some float patterns here and
Oh,
there or
okay.
whatever. Yeah, I really like plain weave. I've been doing more plain weave, just because when you emphasize stripes and colors, that really lets the plain weave lets that shine. And what I've got on the loom right now is plain weave, but I threaded it on 4 harnesses, and I have a stripe of chenille that is on a 5th harness to make the warp floats. So that's rigid heddle thinking. So
It's everywhere.
so that's one thing I use the 16 harness for, if I just need an extra heddle here and there. I've got 16 of them.
Well, Betty, thank you so much for being on here today. It's so amazing for me, and I'm sure for other people too, that I've known your name forever because I've known that book forever. And it's just so exciting to finally meet you. It's like, it's Betty, and here's her book, you know? So
Well,
thank
it's
you so
amazing to
much.
hear all that.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you for those books. As you can hear, they really were the go-to for so many people for so many years. So thank you for what you did.
Well, now
Glad you're still in
I
there.
think the rigid heddle is a real loom now.
There you go. It is a real loom. No more of this when you got to get a real loom. You've got a real loom.
Several of them.
Thank you so much for being on here today. We really do appreciate it. If you want more information, go check out Betty's books. They're just wonderful, and she knows how to teach people and how to get them to understand how their loom works. So I encourage you to do that. We want to thank our sponsor today. We appreciate Desert Fiber Arts. And again, we got to thank Betty for this, that she was one of the founders of that, or the beginnings of that group. But thank you, Desert Fiber Arts, for supporting one of your own on Textiles and Tea. If you would like to sponsor an episode of Textiles and Tea, go to our website. You can do it, your guild can do it, your friends can do it. You can go online at weavespindye.org, and you can sign up to sponsor an episode. If you have questions, call me. We'll talk about it, figure out what you want to do. So again, thank you, Desert Fiber Arts. We appreciate that. Guess what's coming up in 3 months? Hard to believe. Spinning and Weaving Week. And it isn't hard to believe because at Convergence, there's a lot of talk about Spinning and Weaving Week. So we're very excited about working on that now. If your business wants to sponsor and be a sponsor, you can. If you have an event coming up, all y'all who have those conferences coming up in next spring and next summer, here's a chance for you to do a sponsorship to get the word out. There's advertising opportunities. We've got thread talks. Those of you who feel passionate about something about weaving, not a sales pitch, but passionate about something about weaving, come join us on Thread Talks. We'd love to have you there. And we've got Marketplace Live, we've got the fashion show and the tours. Oh, I love seeing the tours of the artist studios. Those are wonderful. We've got Art Sparks. So if you want to learn a little bit, great opportunity. We had some wonderful ones last year. They were just so, the teachers were easy to follow. They knew how to teach. It was really worth it. And the whole week is worth it. And, it's $25 for the whole week. You have to pay a little extra for Art Sparks, but it is a great, great value. And you can watch it at any time. You can watch it for, I think it's 90 days after the event. So those of us who work for a living, we can go back later and watch it. So I encourage you to check it out. And we're also looking for people who want to participate. Come let us know. We would love to have you. We want to thank everybody who has supported HGA through their donations. Those donations help us with Spinning and Weaving Week, Textiles and Tea, Careers in Textiles, and all the programming that we're able to bring to you happens through the donations that you give and your membership. So if you would like to join or donate, please do so at weavespindye.org, and you can do it right there online. Next week, missed episodes. Can't forget that. If you've missed an episode, those of you who are at Convergence, I kept reassuring you, you can go back and watch them later. You can go and watch them on HGA's Facebook page, or you can watch it on, I'm blanking out. You can watch them also on Facebook, and you can watch them at any time that you would like, and they're always up there. So thank you all so much. We have Lori Carlson Stager next week. I'm excited to talk with her. Some of you saw her at Convergence too. So thank you all. Have a great week and happy tea.